Good morning. It was yet another busy week for politics, and here to help us make sense of some of what happened are our panelists this week. They are Marcela Garcia, columnist and editorial writer for the Boston Globe. Welcome, Marcela.
Thank you for having me.
And Darnell Williams, CEO of the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts. Good to have you here, Darnell.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good to be
both
back.
for joining me. Okay, let's start with the Democratic presidential race, where Hillary Clinton pounced on a Bernie Sanders interview in which he struggled to explain how he would implement some of his core policies if he were elected. She accused him of failing to do his homework. Sanders responded with a sort of blistering litany of reasons why he thinks she isn't, quote, qualified to be president. I'm going to start with you here, Marcela. Who got the better of that exchange?
That's a tough question. I think it was Hillary, because you can make a very strong case that a lot of the policies that Sanders is proposing are very weak, in terms of healthcare, for example, single payer.
Yeah.
That idea has been proven not to really work for the United States. It's just not going to work.
It didn't even work in Vermont.
It didn't work in Vermont when
right.
he's a senator from Vermont. So, I think it's, again, Hillary had really me to work with there to accuse him of not being or not having his ideas fully thought out. In my mind, I think it was Hillary, the one that won that.
Darnell, I wonder if the idea of Hillary Clinton, our foremost female politician, running to be the first female president, being unqualified, was a little bit of maybe an unintended dog whistle.
Well, I think that the challenge is that, Marcela's correct, that Bernie came across very light in terms of policy depth, in terms of breaking up the banks, even with his interview with the editorial board of the New York Daily News,
right.
That he crashed and burned. And so this way, to me, is like, was he really trying to throw something out there to be inflammatory? Because Hillary is probably, in my humble opinion, the most qualified, trained and experienced person running for the White House in my recent memory. So I think that was a dud. That's why she laughed at it.
Well, in the meantime, she has some weak spots in her record for certain parts of the Democratic coalition. There was an amazing scene in Philadelphia where former President Bill Clinton was heckled reportedly by Black Lives Matter protesters. Who've been upset about the Clinton-era crime legislation and Hillary Clinton's defense of it in particular as a necessary crackdown on super predators. A lot of people think that was a racist term. Clinton yelled right back at the protesters. He said, "You're defending the people who kill the lives you say matter," end quote. Let's start with you here, Darnell. What'd you make of that?
Well, I think that Bill Clinton is very passionate. He's more than just a Hillary Clinton surrogate. He's a partner. And I think that when he was in the White House, he did a very good job in terms of building a very strong relationship with the black community in terms of the crime bill as well as NAFTA, all of those things that came up. So you can't not to expect Bill Clinton to be passionate. That's Bill Clinton being Bill Clinton.
Is he on solid ground on the issue here, pushing back on that criticism? Or do the critics have a point that they pandered to a certain element?
I think they have a point. And in fact, I was thinking how, the Clintons have been able to get away with this in the black community, because again, this crime bill really unleashed a lot of bad things, obviously. The rates of incarceration, obviously very high for Black and Latino people. And so, especially when you see the support of Hillary in the black community, you would see a disconnect. So I've been very surprised that that hasn't affected the support in the black community for Hillary.
Well, we have to break, but just off the top of your head, would you say a majority of the black community supports what the Clintons did in the 90s during the crack epidemic, crime wave afflicting many cities?
Well, I think the challenge that we have when you go back to the 90s, the three strikes bill was really introduced into our narrative. Mm-hmm. I think that we have to look at black on black crime is really the undertow of all of this. So Black Lives Matter do have some valid points. However, I do believe that during the time, nobody wants to see crime so rampant in their community that nothing is being done about it. So it's a longer conversation than a soundbite, I believe.
All right. Well, let me just take a break here, and when we come back, our weekly diet of Trump talk. Can't have the weekend pass without it. When we continue, please stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking with Darnell Williams of the Urban League of Eastern Mass and Marcela Garcia of the Boston Globe. We've been talking about the Democrats. Let's switch to the Republicans. For me, the big news of the past week, over and above the Wisconsin primary result, is the new Associated Press GFK national poll that finds that, quoting from the New York Times now, 7 out of 10 people, including close to half of GOP voters, have an unfavorable view of Donald Trump. Majorities of men and women, young and old, conservatives, moderates and liberals, whites, Hispanics and blacks. A devastatingly broad indictment of the businessman. That's according to the New York Times. Well, are we seeing the Trump honeymoon coming to a crashing halt or not?
I want to believe we are seeing that, but I'm not so sure. This unfavorable ratings, you know, I know there's some truth to that, but I honestly believe that there's a lot of people that say that they don't like Trump or that they agree with, you know, their critics and that he's not qualified to be a president, that he's not presidential, that he was a terrible businessman, but that still would vote for Trump. And perhaps it's because, you know, they think he has the most viable chance of becoming president because they don't like Ted Cruz or because Kasich doesn't have a chance. But I wouldn't read too much into these numbers. Again, I would like to. I really would like to see the tide turning finally, but I'm not so sure.
I mean, at some point, you get closer to the moment. People don't want to be embarrassed by their president.
No, I think the key is that that was a perfect 2-week storm that converged on Donald Trump, whether it came in terms of foreign policy, nuclear policy, the abortion comment, his campaign manager being arrested for battery. All of those things happened. And then when Donald Trump came to define at a deeper level on the policy side, he came up Trump light. And so I think people are starting to realize that he's a blustering person. He has a blustering personality. He's a master manipulator on the media. But when it comes to the depth and the acumen that it requires to be in the Oval Office, I think the covers are off.
I mean, really, maybe we're overthinking this. He's continuing to get roughly the same level of vote he got going back to New Hampshire.
Because
but
people
the
are angry.
anti-Trump vote is coalescing.
Perhaps. Yeah. I would agree to that. Yeah.
People are angry at the government and how it is operating, and Trump has tapped into that anger. So in spite of the things that we're saying, there's still a foundation of support for him.
All right. Well, Marcela, Darnell, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
To our viewers, we're going to actually continue this conversation right now over on cbsboston.com for a few minutes. We want to get into the whole charter school issue as well as a little more Trump talk. So please check us out on the web. For the rest of you, it's back to my colleagues for more WBZ News. All right, welcome back to those of you with us on cbsboston.com. Are we done talking Trump here, or did you have anything further you wanted to say? I mean, New York State, he's up by huge margins in the polls. He needs to top 50%, both statewide and in the individual congressional districts, to take a big delegate haul out of there. Do you suspect he's going to do it? I mean, I know that's
the challenge is that in New York City carries the bulk of the state in terms of the Democratic side. The other part, upstate New York, is more rural and suburban, so that's where the Republican votes are.
Right.
So it's going to be real interesting to see whether or not that he's going to be able to galvanize those New York. But everybody this week is trying to bone up. I'm from Brooklyn. I'm a New York senator.
Right.
I do business in New York. So everybody's saying I love New York.
Right.
So we're going to see how it's going to play out.
And we know Ted Cruz bakes a mean matzah after last week, right?
That's
Right.
Very impressive.
His New York values piece is not going to help him.
No, they're hitting hard on that. Go ahead.
One thing I wanted to add is that Well, what we saw in the last couple of weeks, leading into the Wisconsin primary that Trump lost, was a lot more scrutiny from the media. We saw those interviews in which he, stumbled upon the abortion comment and all of that. So I would like to see more of that too. See the media coming really, really hard after him and start questioning a little bit more to try to trip him, because that's really what happened. And I think that had a big impact in the Wisconsin voters for sure. But, here's hoping that that's going to continue to happen.
I would add, I'd like to see more of that caliber of interview directed
Absolutely.
at all the candidates.
You're right.
I mean, that's what this is
Fair
all
enough.
about.
I would hope that when he does not answer a question, that there is more follow-through and stick-to-itiveness to get an answer, rather than him changing the narrative to speak about what he wants to talk about, rather than answering the question.
Right.
Yeah, he's a master at that.
All right, let's take a final few minutes here to talk about a local issue that's really, really important, and it's going to be front and center throughout the summer and fall, probably, unless the legislature gets its act together. The state Senate this past week approved its own charter school bill that allows for more charters, but also imposes new regulatory controls on charter schools. Now, charter school advocates have denounced this as doing little to meet the huge unmet demand for charter school seats. Legislators have been anxious in both branches to try to avoid a ballot question that could be superseded by legislative agreement on change. So let me start with that. Why are the legislators, Senator Dan Rosenberg sat right where you're sitting a few weeks ago and said, no, we want to work this out. We don't want this to go to the ballot. Why? I mean, that suggests to me they think that the lifting of the charter school cap has got an edge at the polls in the fall. Do you two believe that?
I think so, too. I think so. I mean, there was a poll this week, obviously, conducted by the pro-charter advocates that, showed support for lifting the cap. But, I mean, I would have to look, what the senators did was really amazing. You could really see that they went through a lot of meetings, worked deep. They really dove deep into the issues. But what they came up with, which was supposed to be a compromise bill, was anything but. They really challenged the operation of the charters, as we come to know them right now. I mean, we have the highest achieving charters of the country, and so for them to be gutting some of those, some of that structure, I found that very, very disappointing. I mean, the funding issue, I think it's a very legitimate issue to be able to direct or to increase the foundation budget in general for everyone. I agree on that. I loved the idea of instituting a unified enrollment or opt-out lotteries in which parents could be automatically opt-in into the charter school lotteries. Because I think that totally would change the makeup of the charter school, the students, the student population, which is a big criticism.
Okay.
So, but on the other hand, it really does very little to actually lift the cap, while at the same time, really invading the current, the way in which charters are operated, which is full autonomy.
All right, Darnell, I know you have a little different view on this.
Well, I have a different view. Let me start by saying that I believe that the charter schools were brought into existence because you could extend the length of the day or the time that they go throughout the year, and they are not as restrictive with some of the union rules, even though there's some charter schools do have union employees. And so I think that is part of the narrative. The area where I would want to advocate for is the funding. I think the funding that goes with the charter school versus the funding to the public school system, we got to fix that. It's very complicated. What I said earlier to the point is that the dollars that follow the charter school students are taken away from the public schools system. And so, therefore, I think there's a mismatch, and we got to fix that.
But that's a child the public system is not educating. What do they have to?
But what happens to that child that still does not get into the charter school? The question is that we should be trying to...
Well, they get the money once the kid goes
But you
into
lose the
charter
money
school.
because the money follows the child.
You lose the child, too, so you're not educating a student.
But you're not educating, but the money left over. If I use Boston as an example, 8,000 charter school students get that X number of dollars. The same amount of money goes to 57,000 students. So you can't have the same amount of money going to 8,000 students versus that similar amount going to 57,000. That's not equitable. That's the challenge we have.
I think that the charter school critics, to the extent that they're saying, don't leave kids behind, kids whose parent or parents aren't savvy enough to try to get them into a charter school. Don't forget about them.
That's it.
Keep the focus on them. I think that's totally right on. However, if you go back to the start of the charter school movement in the state, one of the ideas was that failing schools often never break out of their rut because of hidebound union regulations that prevent a longer school day and so forth, and resistance to bad teachers being grandfathered in, and these kinds of things.
Principals having the authority to hire.
Right, exactly, a whole range of issues. And that part of the idea of having the money follow the student who leaves the conventional school for the charter was to turn up the heat under that conventional school and under the union to reform its rules to address the changing reality of the situation and become themselves more competitive for that student and the dollars they represent. Are we losing that by saying, oh, no, we have to make the failing school whole?
I think you hit the nail on the head, because by introducing competition, you hope that the system will become more competitive, like you were saying, and that hasn't happened. What you were saying earlier about, it's actually what critics use as an argument against charters. I think it's actually an argument for more charters. When you say that, we should have more people, more kids or more students, not just the very savvy parents, access to charters. That's an argument for more charters, because you want more kids to be able to have access to that education that the current system is not providing. I mean, that's the argument that charter school supporters use, right? That because these kids don't have access to this education in their public system, we should lift the cap and, make more seats.
I mean, same question for you. Are we letting this failing status quo off the hook by making them whole financially?
I think there's elements of truth to both sides of that argument. I think at the end of the day, charter schools have demonstrated that they are doing a better job in educating students because of less restrictions that they have inherited that's in our traditional system. Now, the argument that it should have been a catalyst for innovation and for change and for elongated school day, for a longer school year, we're still operating our system based upon an agrarian society that started back in the 30s. And we're still using it today as the model, and that model is not necessarily effective. So the challenge is that we have this argument, lift the charter schools, but what happens to that child that's left behind? So innovation has not caught up with us on the traditional school. And until we get that, I'm going to argue that we need to make sure that the funding is equivalent, whether it's charter or public school, just like METCO's budget. I know there's a disagreement in terms of if METCO has a line item, give the charter school a line item, and keep the public schools so it'll be sacrosanct.
Well, let's close out with this. There's a key date, I believe it's next month in May, coming up in this whole political battle we're talking about, when the Mass Teachers Association, our largest teacher union, will meet to, first of all, decide whether they want to continue with the current leadership. Barbara Mataloni's a real anti-charter hardliner, or change direction. And also, I'm not sure if they'll actually vote, but they're going to be discussing whether or not to sink millions of dollars into an ad campaign in the fall. I love teachers, and the teachers union does a lot of valuable work and advocates quite effectively on behalf of their membership. No criticism there, but what do you expect to see happen? What outcome would be the best for the key stakeholders here, which is the children and the families, in terms of the teachers union and their stance and the role they play? I want to start with you on this one, Darnell.
Well, I think at the end of the day, I would want to see the BTU and all of the teacher unions across the Commonwealth do what's in the best interest of the children, putting the children at the center of the debate rather than the length of the contract or the benefits for the teachers. I want to support the teachers, but I want to make sure that we advocate for the children, that each one of them have an opportunity for a quality education, regardless of whether it's a charter or public school, that they're getting educated to the best of our ability. And I don't know if that's happening. I know it's not happening. And I know that I can speak specifically our various systems, but that's the crux of it. So I don't want, you can move the chairs, do the circle, and the smoke and the mirrors, but at the end of the day, it's about the kids.
I mean, Marcela, what they do is so crucial here. They are one of the most powerful political forces in the state.
And this obviously is going to loom over, it's going to impact the decision that they make, whether who becomes a new leader and whether they, decide to put all this money behind the ballot question. And I think that's going to be the issue. That's going to be the main issue. And I don't think they're going to stay away from it. I think they're just going to go all in. They're going to decide to mount the campaign because they're pretty sure it's going to end up at the ballot. And so they're going to have to fight it. I think the Massachusetts Teachers Union is going to vote for, putting all the money in, which is, in my view, unfortunate because
that's going to be an uphill battle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that's the debate that they're going to have to,
But that's like pushing a rock up a hill.
Right.
And we know where that hill falls off to. And so I think
the pro-charters advocates have a lot of money, too.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of corporate investment in charters.
That's where they're going to go.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, thank you both very much. I appreciate you sticking around to do this.
Sure. Thank you.